Welcome. My name is Polly Peters. I serve on the Adult Ed Committee, and welcome to week 3 of Sounds of the Genuine, led by our own Carol Allen, former Associate Pastor of Congregational Care, and sponsored by the Adult Ed Committee. Sounds of the Genuine again. Last week we were joined by Fourth Church member Arlene Falk, and we're moved by her life story that she conveys so well in her memoir, Walking on Pins and Needles. And this morning we have the pleasure of welcoming Jim Garner, author and past chair of Adult Ed, for his storytelling abilities. Like I mentioned last week, please check the website and the bulletin in terms of what Adult Ed has in the pipeline. We have a class starting in October on the book of Ezekiel, a class on housing insecurity in November, and 2 great First Tuesday book clubs, Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson and Interfaith Leadership by Eboo Patel. So please join us. Let us pray. Dear Lord, hear our prayer. We praise your name this morning and are so grateful for this early fall day in this beautiful place with our beloved Fourth Church community. Be with us and open our ears, minds, and hearts as we once again have the privilege to share in a fellow Fourth member's story. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Polly, and welcome back to those of you here and online at home. I'm happy to add my welcome back to this time of listening for the sound of the genuine in yourself and in each other. And a day to celebrate, clearly, the installation of Fourth Church's newest member of the pastoral staff, Nancy Benson Nicole, one whom I am told knows well the sound of the genuine. She listens well, and I hope that you will discover that as you share times in ministry with her in the days ahead. In preparation, I'd like to quote briefly again from Howard Thurman. He heard the sound of the genuine in his experiences of God, seeing and loving him and other human beings whose backs were up against the wall through the eyes of Jesus. Thurman experienced himself in God's gaze as a person of value and worth, despite how he was devalued by those who had set themselves up to be arbiters of who really counts as human beings, and those who had assumed control over the delivery of commodities and capital. Thurman gave his life and work to translating his experience into ways that others might be embraced by it. And this is the quote to the Spelman College graduates. He said, "Ponder it. The language is from another time, but let it sink in. There is in you something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And sometimes there is so much traffic going on in your minds, so many different kinds of signals, so many vast impulses floating through your organism that go back thousands of generations, long before you were even a thought in the sound of creation. And you are buffeted by these, and in the midst of all this, you have got to find out your name. Who are you?" And he went on to elaborate. Now, if I hear the sound of the genuine in me, and if you hear the sound of the genuine in you, it is possible for me to go down in me and come up in you, so that when I look at myself through your eyes, having made the pilgrimage, I see in you what you see in me, and the wall that separates and divides us will disappear, a kind of intimacy. Ponder that. I hear in Thurman words that our creation of an identity, a value system, hopes and aspirations, and beliefs is not a self-contained, solitary effort, but occurs in the context of relationships, shaped by stories, created and shared within communities and cultures. The stories we tell about ourselves and others, the stories we hear about ourselves and others, how we do our work, how we engage in personal relationships, and the focus of our commitments can be tainted by the hierarchies in which we live and work. They can hurt us and hurt others. But together we can revise them in ways that help discover other possibilities that generate healing and restoration. I believe Arlene Falk embodied that approach for us last week, and I'm deeply grateful that she was willing to share her life story. A sign that the Holy Spirit is in and among us. And as we prepare to hear our guest for this morning, I invite you to engage again in what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the ministry of listening. Try to step outside of the roles you play every day. Let them go. Just open your hearts, your minds, your bodies to be surprised. Listen for expressions, images that catch your attention in the stories you hear. A word or a gesture that touches you in particular. What do the storyteller's words suggest to you about his purpose, his values, his beliefs, his hopes, his dreams, his commitments? And then think what in your own life and work accounts for those responses to his stories. In what way have you been moved by being present to witness and listen to his story? Where has his experience taken you that you might not have otherwise gone had you not heard him? Many of you here will know Jim Garner as one among you who has served on the session of Fourth Church and as the recent moderator of the Adult Education Committee of the Academy for Faith and Life. I could say many things about him, but I hesitate to because I don't know how he wants to introduce himself to us. So I'll let you find out what else he is up to when you hear his story. James Finn Garner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will tell you why I did that in a little while. Is the mic good? All good? Okay. Pardon me. Yeah, I've served on. I'm the guy who makes the wise remarks at session meetings. So if you knew that, when I had a bestseller about 25 years ago called "Politically Correct Bedtime Stories," I had to have a lot of interviews with people, and when they heard the middle name, they heard James Finn Garner. They wanted to make that connection and say, "Oh, you're from a big family of Irish storytellers when you all shared and you're all terrific speakers with each other." And it couldn't have been further from the truth, because that's not my real middle name. That's my stage name and now my pen name. My real middle name is Edward. It's very English, and it's very indicative of how I was raised as a non-storyteller. My father was not a storyteller. He was the most silent man you're ever going to meet. He even said once at dinner with my mom and my two brothers and I, "What do you think dinner time is? A place to talk about what happened during the day?" And that was it. That was like the end of the discussion. He often also said, when you're talking, you ain't thinking. And our desire was always to please our father, to be smart, be achieving young men. And so most of us didn't talk, at least not in the house. And I was just thinking as we were starting today, how that cut off a lot of his own life story that I only learned later from his cousins, that his father came over from Liverpool at age 10 with $5 in his pocket, lost his brother on the docks of Montreal for a year, and only by happenstance did his cousin find his brother and rescue him. His brother was 8 at the time. And so my father was raised in a household that didn't tell that story because we had no background in England. It was not our heritage. We were here now because what they had left was so dire and poverty-stricken and heartbreaking, I guess. So that's a point for my father not telling us stories many times because there are some bad stories to tell. Now, and my grandmother used to complain when my dad would date my mother and come over. She said, "Is he coming over again? He never says anything." And when I was born, I was the third, and she said, "Oh, it's another son, and it looks just like him." Now, my mother was more Irish side of the family. She was 100% Irish. My dad was half Irish. And my mom talked basically all the time to fill the void that was in the house, and that drove my father up the wall. Because if you wanted to say something, it should be something important. It should be well thought out and fitting for the situation. But that didn't happen all the time, and it was just lots and lots of talk. These are kind of my roots, to go with the tree metaphor. It's like a household where you didn't talk a lot, and when you had to talk, it had to be well thought out, and it had to be worthwhile, because if it wasn't, don't even talk. But then, so I don't know where the sense of humor came from, my sense of humor, because my mother has no discernible sense of humor that I can find. She laughs a lot, and she has friends, and is a social person, but everything I've ever done professionally, she's got no clue what it means. She just doesn't get it. And my father would have a sense of humor that he'd be having a nice quiet dinner, he'd go to the kitchen, take his plate to the table, and then for some reason shout out, "Yaha, San Antone!" And that was it. So my older brothers and I were in this milieu. We all were kind of a match set. We do look like my father. We get mistaken for each other once in a while. And we really didn't know who my father was for a long time. And we have worked to fill that gap for most of our lives. And who he was an accountant for Ford Motor, cash manager for Ford Motor Credit. And so we didn't know. It was always like, Bill's boys, who are they? They're there, they're the Garner boys. But who were we in this kind of, not arid, but empty background? Who were we in this? My oldest brother, Tom, became a businessman. He was an average student. He was a great guy. My middle brother, Pat, was stellar in everything. He was stellar in school, stellar in athletics, very talented, very social. And eventually he went into acting. He was the apple of my parents' eyes. And myself, I couldn't really catch up with my middle brother, Pat. I was always in the shadow, very awkward socially, and that's just how it was. And the silence in the house kind of taught me that that's where my place was, that it's like, stay back, so focus on your academics, because that's all that mattered was academics. So I focused on that, while Pat focused on performing, and I focused on writing. One thing my brother Pat and I had in common was an adoration for old comedy movies. We would watch Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers any chance we got, and even really terrible ones, Three Stooges. We would watch it all the time. And my mother hated that, just absolutely couldn't stand it. And we, It was just in us. And I read a lot of underground humor when I was a teenager. My mom hated that. I had to hide that, but I was a big fan of the National Lampoon and stand-up comedy and stuff, but I just had to keep that kind of quiet, kind of on the down low. So I threw myself into study. I went to a very strict boys' school, Catholic school, went to a competitive university, and pursued academics because, you know, I wanted an English degree, so what can you do with an English degree? I heard that maybe 8 solid years of my life. What can you do with an English degree? So I'd have to go, of course, into academics or go to law school, neither of which I cared about in the least, but I had to say that and keep things going. And I really, really wanted to be a writer somehow because I admired writers, but I didn't know how to do it. I had no idea really how to do it. And about this time, I grew up in Detroit, which is a very harsh kind of environment, not cosmopolitan like Chicago is, does not support the arts like many cities do. It's a rough city, and it's basically rock and roll and sports, and that's it. So I was big on punk rock in '77 and '78. I love the do-it-yourself feeling of it. I was an elite young man, but it's kind of like this was my little rebellion to go break into bars and listen to music when I was 16. That was very, very disruptive and not respectable. But then I went to college and got a degree and was all very respectable. So my brother Pat, when he decided to be an actor, kind of gave my dad a lot of agita. He was a smoker and worked a very stressful job and didn't take care of himself, so he had started having heart attacks in his 40s. And we used to joke that it was Pat, his choosing acting as a lifestyle for the reason why he had these heart attacks. But it probably wasn't too far off of the mark. When I came up with telling him I wanted to be a writer, he had no idea what I was talking about. You know, it was like he was upset that he didn't know anybody who could help me. He didn't have any connections in any journalism or anything like that. But he just wanted me to keep my grades up and work hard and be the best whatever I could be. If you want to be a garbage man, my dad had 2 other things he always said. If you could be the best person you're going to be in what you choose to do it for your utmost, and you should be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning. He was a very honest and upright man, very friendly man, but it was like you got to be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning. He also told me about hillbillies, but it was like, I don't want to talk about that. It was Detroit. So my dad had his heart attacks when Pat was entering college and choosing to be an actor. And then he had his final heart attack when I was entering senior year of college and pursuing an English degree. So I had nobody to reach out to and figure things out. I figured out, yes, I'm going to finish this degree, even though it was very difficult at the end because my father valued academic achievement above everything else. I moved to Chicago, kind of reclaiming roots because my parents are both from here, from the South Side. And I was determined to find a job that used an English degree. I took everyone's negative feelings inside and said, well, I've got to find a job that's about English, uses an English degree. So there was more publishing here. And I interviewed at Concrete Life magazine and the Journal of the American Medical Association, and I finally got a job after a year and a half at with the Realtors Association, writing journals for real estate appraisers, which is not as exciting as it sounds. So I needed more. So I was about 24, 25. It was frustrating. The writing wasn't happening. The whole, nothing was coming out right. I was kind of alone here and had a little bit of a nervous breakdown at 25 and went into therapy for a short time and tried to figure out how to achieve this, how to get out of my own way and quit worrying about it and achieve something because I wanted to achieve. And then finally, at the advice of a friend, I took improv classes. And by doing that, I merged the 2 halves of me that I was not admitting. I was merging the writing half of me and the comedy half of me. Because I had ignored the comedy part of it, and when I started doing it, I realized that I was good at it. I wasn't good at improv. I was okay at improv, but writing the comedy gave me a lot, or doing improv in that year gave me a lot of very strong lessons. One was this. When you come on the stage, stomp on it. And you stomp on the stage, and then you own it. You've got the floor. And I try to remind myself of that when I get up in front of the stage. It's really good. You should try it, because it's like you're there, and you've got something to say. When I was raised, I didn't think I had anything to say, because, of course, I was 10 and didn't have full thought-out arguments. So we didn't make the arguments. You had to have it or not. So by stamping on the stage, I at least say, here I am, and then I have to figure out what to say. But here I am, and it's my time, which I was always grateful for. One of the very first lessons I learned in improv. The other is that when a joke bombs, no one dies. It's a really good thing to know. It's good to know when a story doesn't come together. It's not fatal. It's not, no one's going to dispossess you, kick you out of the government, or anything like that. And it taught me to trust my, my guts, work at the top of my intelligence, which in improv you're supposed to, you do not drink or take drugs for improv because you're supposed to be working intelligently, and you do not go for the cheap joke. I have not followed that all my life, but generally, do not go for the cheap joke. They never went for a cheap joke at a session meeting. It's not, you know, not allowed. And also communication and working from the back of your head in a way. I like to work from the back of my head where things cannot be planned so well. So doing this made me performing. So from there, improv, I went to perform in some clubs in town with scripted stuff and this and that. I met my lovely wife. She backs up everything I do, even when it's awful. She loves the creation of it. She respects that, and that's really pretty crucial when you work for days and days and days and nothing comes out, but you're creating it, and that's really great to know. I made a lot of friends in the town. I gained immense self-confidence, and then finally, one day, after a few beers at Ravinia, my old high school friend of mine and I got together and said, we should do something on stage. Let's do a performance art thing, which was big in the late 80s. And so we bought black leotards and some black sunglasses, and we became, you're going to zoom in on Jazz Poetry Truth. This is me here. That's Pat, my high school buddy, and still good friend and writing partner. So we went on stage with a piece of T-bone steak, and we recited I'm a Little Teapot really loudly, and then went off about 10 minutes on things that started with T. And it was really, really stupid. It was really a lot of fun. And people either loved it or hated it, so I knew we were onto something. And we went and did this. I'll pass this around because you really want to see it up close. Luckily, this is one of the few photos taken then, and we have no video of us because, thank God, no one was photographing anything back then. And so from Jazz Poetry Truth, I started some other shows and was in them or hosted them or whatever. And then from one of those hosting jobs came the stories that made up Politically Correct Bedtime Stories. I wrote those as filler between acts in a cabaret, and we would read them, and the book eventually added a dozen stories, and it took off, and here we are. So I was able to make a living writing so far. It's an up and down thing, but when we did Jazz Poetry Truth, I was very gratified when my brother, the actor, came in town and saw us do, I think we sang Silent Night with tin cans for the Christmas show. Or we were doing, I can't remember. It's always a blur. But he never liked improv, and he was sitting in the audience, and he was laughing, and he said, that's a stitch. So that was a really, a Detroit's phrase, like, that was a stitch. So your competition never gives up, never eases up with your brother. But I was glad to find this part of it that I could call my own. And part of me, my background, the punk rock thing, the Detroit thing, the feeling like, there's no support system. That has been with me this whole time in a way that when I look at people who are in New York and they have an agent and they go to parties and all this other stuff, realize that's not been me and never really has been. If I wanted it to, it's not what I do. So luckily I've got that persistence that I learned in Detroit and in improv to not give up, keep moving. Something will work. And that's probably for the best because that's who I am. I don't know what Dad would have thought about it, but even if he is around, he probably wouldn't tell me. So, thank you. Do I stay for questions, Carol? What do we do? Or I could sulk.
What I'd like to ask you to do next is turn to the people at your table, but don't just start talking. Sit a minute and what have you heard that touches you, that caught your attention, that you would miss if you had not heard it? And then just speak that as much as you wish to whoever's at your table, but just listen to one another. Each of you take a turn to speak what you'd like, and the others just listen. Does that make sense? So you're not having an exchange at this point, but give yourself a minute to reflect and then share what you wish, and then we'll go to the next step. Dear friends, I'm going to interrupt you in order to keep with our schedule, but I invite you to, Jim is still here, and I invite you to share what you'd like from how you were stirred up by his storytelling. In whatever way you'd like.
I have something.
Who said that? Annette?
I had a lot of trouble with no structure. I really admire the fact that somehow you held on to yourself all this time without a plan doesn't have to be written, but a plan that would, I wouldn't expect it to be like, other writers, but just a system or something that sustained what you did. And I have a hard time picturing your day. Huh? And I admire the fact that you obviously did a great job with your life, but I found it really hard to relate to that.
Yeah.
And the part about your dad, I understood very well. We have people in my family who were silent, and they didn't say anything unless it was negative, so,
I think, I have to write in the morning, and that's luckily a good structure. And I'm not an inspiration writer. It's like sit down and do stuff and keep it going. If it's 200 words, if it's 500, you just have to keep doing it. And then it's occasionally those little bursts that that renew my faith in what I can do. Suddenly there's a burst, and I've got this great concept or a great phrase or a great scene in a book, and I love it, and that's all I can hope for, because I won't go into the books I'm writing now because they're just too weird. But I enjoy them. And my oldest brother, the cost accountant, said he couldn't see how I could do this without writing the entire book in outline before I do it. And he said, well, if I've done that, then I've written the book, and it's probably a crummy book because it's not full. It's just an outline of stuff. So, but he, that's where his brain goes.
Yeah.
I don't recommend it for everybody. I mean, it's probably not good for my health, but to be this, but it's the only way I know how to do it. And I think most writers probably say that too. I see people who put out a book a year and they can do it. I can't do that. I just had to figure out how I do what I do, and how to do it more often is the challenge. So.
Someone else like to respond?
thank you very much for the writing observations. I'm a former copy editor, now working as a researcher, and in my spare time, I'm writing detective stories. There's a wonderful new book from the Mystery Writers of America called How to Write a Mystery, and there are 2 adjacent essays, Always Outline and Never Outline. So with about 70 different practitioners and many names that I recognized, I learned so many things that it's just a forest of bookmarks of things that, oh yeah, I want to know that person's advice about that particular topic. But what I was doing with it originally when I bought the book was writing blog posts. And I was on a site called Chicago Now that had the Tribune's backing back then. And I was writing observations about different essays and writing even imaginary stories about the writer's room in my mind where different writers were commenting on them. And suddenly the Tribune closed the site. So I wrote a last visit to the writer's room telling them that I'm not publishing my blog anymore. And people are still asking me, aren't you going to do this? No, I'm going to concentrate on my novel. I'm going to concentrate on my not very old job. And I'm going to concentrate on what I know I can do and not what is in somebody else's control.
Anyone have it?
Well, Jim, first of all, I admire you getting up and sharing openly like that. That takes some guts. And I was struck by the fact that I've known you for 25 years, and I didn't know really any of that. So that was a lot of learning. And I was struck by your relationship with your father and also how doing improv helped you connect with a new side of you. So I think that was great.
Why improv was so good, but more than I explained up there, it was just allowed me to do it. It allowed me to, I was telling Polly and Carol, I wanted to be a writer, I think, at about 13 when I read Vonnegut. And he's so funny, and he's so smart, and he's just got so much weight, and I'll never get there. In fact, I'm not even trying to get there, but that's what inspired me to be a writer. And maybe the improv helped me, you know what it gave me? It made it enjoyable. It made the writing enjoyable, because it's a slog. It's a solitary thing. It's frustrating. There's a lot of negativity around it. And when you're in your 20s and you're like, what am I doing? And if you're 16, you haven't written your first novel or whatever, at least the humor made it more fun. And it made better friends through that. Who are all writing screenplays and trying things, and cartoonists and stuff. And we're just all trying in the same boat. I got to say, it really helps to have a bestseller for your first book. I would recommend it.
And second and third.
And second, it takes the pressure off a little bit. Rent is paid that one.
Anyone else have something happen in you that would not have had you not heard Jim? I mean, you're all sharing things like that, but is there anything else that... Did I stop the conversation? So sorry, just say whatever you'd like.
And Jack didn't even put it, we're thinking it over.
And I told Carol and Polly over here that I've started doing essays on stage and live performance about 15 years ago to start just getting back into getting the audience reaction, getting a feedback of things, and feeling the satisfaction of getting up. It's satisfying. It's satisfying to do something most people won't do, and they're afraid to do. And I've got enough fear in it to try to do it right, and that's enough. And improv was good for that. Just kind of like make it like, here I am. We're all going to get out of this alive. Maybe we'll have a laugh, and boom. And knowing my brother hated improv was very satisfaction, very big satisfaction, for lack of structure. But the essays I write, it's about dissecting an eye in 6th grade science class. Or I haven't had that interesting a life, but I could write a good essay about a couple of things. And I read them off. I don't memorize them because that's an actor and that's a lot of pressure. I just read them and do a good job of acting them from a script, and that's satisfying. So I think getting over the what I should do was a big deal, like a Catholic thing, because I was raised Catholic, and like, this is how writers work. And it's like, it's really hard to get that out of your system. Like, this is how writers do. You should do this. You should journal every day. You should do this. You should go to conferences and stuff. It's like, if it works, fine. If it doesn't, ignore it. And I change my pattern constantly because it stops working after 10 years. So, but the should-haves will kill you. So I'm glad I, learned to ignore, to break the rules when necessary. So. I'm glad we got subtitles now. That's excellent. That's a new thing.
Any last words?
For Annette's point about structure, it's kind of like, I would love structure too, but it's not what I can have right now. And it is a real benefit to have an income and a wife who works so I can get benefits. I would never work in a shack and panic all the time because you've just heard how my work process is terribly full of panic and I'm not Dostoevsky or your poor Russian writer. I can't do that. So I just have to be kind to myself. I've never given this talk before to think about my roots and that kind of thing, and I've got to be kind to myself to let these things out, to not beat myself up, to not talk about what I should do, because it doesn't help me. It might help other writers. It doesn't help me at all. So just to lay this out like this is satisfying because that's literally how my father was. He was off the wall. And we have big holes in our family history because he just wouldn't talk about it, because his father wouldn't talk about it. And piecing it together is the only thing we can do. So I don't know what he would say about my performing or me in a leotard. Hard to say, hard to really predict what people do for that. Or what he would think about what I was doing. And we really wanted to please my father all the time, and he was not demanding and not a slave driver or anything like that, but we wanted to please him, and we rarely got through that we did please him. As long as you got straight A's, that's all that mattered. So my middle brother sometimes reminisces and says, what if Dad was still alive? He says, if Dad was still alive, he'd probably make me go to law school, and that's probably not a good thing. So don't start dreaming about what advice Dad would give you. My dad's advice was often wrong. But, just it's good to think about, but don't ever hang your hat on like life would be a lot easier if his advice was there, because he was who he was. And we are who we are, and we have to keep moving forward. So
Thank you for letting us see you and hearing from you in ways that we don't always. Next week it's your turn. Please bring your trees. Just a sketch, but it will be your turn to speak your word of your life story. So thank you for being here today, and thanks for Jim. See you next week.